Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. I have a few questions. How did Star Wars go from this to this? And how did it go from this to this? And what about this to this? For those of you who have been following my channel for a while, you'll undoubtedly know that I personally regard the Star Wars franchise to be dead, as I had talked about in a video that I had released last year. And you'll undoubtedly also know that I hold Kathleen Kennedy personally responsible for the franchise's destruction due to her position as president of Lucasfilm, as well as her unrelenting efforts to co-opt the franchise to push her radical feminist agenda. Her hiring of activist documentarian Charmin Obaid-Chinoy to direct a new Grey Palpatine movie is just one more example of her ongoing efforts to completely undo everything that George Lucas had ever created. But have you ever wondered why it was so easy for Kathleen Kennedy and her handpicked cohorts to destroy this once beloved and formerly very successful franchise? I have uncovered what I believe are some underlying fundamental reasons that made Star Wars vulnerable to the assaults that have utterly destroyed it. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please subscribe to this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! If you recall the saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, that saying is also true for a fictional franchise. But to understand what its weakest link might be, we need to know what defines a science fiction, fantasy, or science fantasy franchise. And what defines it is its canon, which, within the context of fictional works, is defined as the body of works that take place in a particular fictional universe that are widely considered to be official or authoritative, especially those that were created by the original author or developer of the universe. While there may be different views as to what a particular franchise's canon might consist of, quite often there is a core set of works that are regarded as being the most authoritative. There may also be other sets of works that are regarded as being less authoritative, which may also have varying degrees of authoritativeness. And when some aspect of a work that is regarded as being less authoritative contradicts a work that is regarded as being more authoritative, then the latter is considered to be the correct one, which makes total sense. But is there a way that we can measure how strong a particular franchise's canon is? This is actually very important, because a franchise's canon defines the nature of its fictional universe, its characters, and its plot lines. But given how abstract all of that sounds, finding a way to actually measure its strength may not be easy. And what exactly do I mean by strength of a fictional canon in the first place? Essentially, the stronger a fictional canon is, the more impervious it will be to attempts of redefining its fictional universe, characters, or plot lines. But the weaker a fictional canon is, the more vulnerable it will be to those same potentially destructive possibilities. That's very straightforward, and to that I can add the following. The more abstract, open to interpretation, loosely defined, incoherent, or inconsistent a particular canon's authoritative works are, the more inherently weak that canon will be. But the more a particular canon is based on consistent, coherent, and well-defined authoritative works that are less open to interpretation, the more inherently strong that particular canon will be. And, unsurprisingly, it's the works that are written that, more often than not, fall into the latter of those two possibilities. That goes hand in hand with the definition that I cited earlier in the video, because written works are more likely to have been written by the franchise's original creator, which is typically a single individual. Now, while it's not unreasonable for a canon to include works that involve the efforts of multiple individuals, chances are that the bulk of those works will probably be directly attributable to a single original creator. Written works have the advantage that they can more effectively provide more in-depth world-building, character development, and plot lines, but they also need to be coherent and consistent within themselves and between each other. Other forms of media, like movies, TV shows, comic books, and video games, such as Halo or Mass Effect, that include dependencies on visual and possibly interactive elements, are inherently far more open to interpretation, which has a tendency of weakening their canons. And due to the nature of those forms of media and how they are produced, it also becomes far more likely that multiple individuals are going to be involved in their writing and creation, meaning that there is an increased chance for inconsistencies and incoherences to develop, which, if they do, will weaken a franchise's canon. It also needs to be remembered that visual elements by themselves don't necessarily add as much to world building, character development, or plot lines as the written word can, and interactive elements typically lead to multiple possible storyline paths that have different outcomes, which may lead to a more muddled and weakened canon. But all of these different forms of media, to varying degrees, do include the written word. Novels are based purely on the written word, while movies and shows have written scripts. Written elements allow each of these forms of media to have a common set of metrics that can be applied to understand their potential strengths or weaknesses. But there are no equivalent metrics that can be applied to visual or interactive elements, which means that I can't really assess the strengths of fictional canons that are based primarily in comic books or video games because they don't contain enough written material to examine. And it's that lack of written material in comic books and video games as compared with novels, movies, and TV shows that makes them the weakest in terms of having a potentially strong canon. So what metrics exist that can be applied to the written word? For novels, page counts are not useful due to the fact that page sizes vary, as do the sizes of printed type and the margins, so there's no consistency in the actual amount of words that can be printed per page, and some pages may be intentionally blank. But what is very useful are total word counts for novels and scripts, because the higher the total word count for a particular canon's authoritative works is, the more likely that franchise's world-building characters and plot lines are more fully developed. But the lower the total word counts are, the opposite is more than likely going to be true. We should also differentiate between written words that originate from novels as compared with those that originate from scripts. Because canons that incorporate visual elements are more open to interpretation, the higher a canon's percentage of written words originating in scripts, the weaker that canon is ultimately going to be. And the reverse will be true as its percentage of written words that originate in novels is higher. Another useful metric is the number of writers involved. The fewer the number of writers that are involved, the greater the likelihood that a canon's authoritative works will be coherent and consistent. But as the number of writers involved grows, the greater the likelihood will be that the canon's authoritative works may be incoherent or inconsistent. And when multiple writers are involved, another metric can be derived, a percentage of how much the original creator's written words actually constitute a canon's authoritative works. Thus, in line with the definition for a fictional canon, the more its written authoritative content is directly attributable to its original creator, the more coherent, consistent, and stronger that canon is likely going to be. But the more a particular franchise's written authoritative content is directly attributable to writers other than the original creator, the less coherent, less consistent, and ultimately weaker that canon is probably going to be. So that's 5 distinct metrics that we can use to assess a canon's potential strength. Now let's take a look at the 4 individual franchises, of which one will be the pre-Disney owned Star Wars franchise. And the reason that I'm going with the pre-Disney owned Star Wars canon is to illustrate its vulnerabilities that existed prior to being sold. The first franchise that we'll include is J.R.R. Tolkien's much-beloved Middle-earth franchise, whose canon is based on 6 individual books. First, there's his 1937 novel, The Hobbit, which was written solely by him. Then his Lord of the Rings trilogy was published between 1954 and 1955, and all 3 books were written solely by him. But his 1977 novel, The Silmarillion, was published posthumously by his son Christopher, who also edited and partially wrote the book. Additionally, Guy Gavriel Kay also helped to edit the book. And finally, his posthumously published 1980 novel, The Unfinished Tales, was also edited and partially written by his son Christopher. There are also a wide variety of other writings that are more broadly referred to as Tolkien's Legendarium, which, due to their incompleteness and the fact that they were collected and edited by Christopher and several other authors, don't carry the same level of authoritativeness as the 6 novels that I listed. The second franchise that we'll include is Frank Herbert's Dune universe, which is composed of 6 novels that he wrote himself. There are also additional novels that were written by his son Brian Herbert and science fiction author Kevin J. Anderson that are partially based on notes discovered a decade after Frank Herbert's death in 1986, as well as other writings, but these are not considered to be as authoritative as Frank Herbert's original 6 novels. The third franchise that we'll include is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter universe, which is based on her 7 Harry Potter novels, 1 2-part play script that was published as a novel, and her 3 Fantastic Beasts movies, of which the third was not solely written by her. Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore was written by both J.K. Rowling and Steve Kloves. And the fourth franchise, of course, is Star Wars before it was owned by Disney. And its pre-Disney owned canon was composed of the following: the 6 live-action movies, episodes 1 through 6, the Clone Wars animated movie, and the 133 episodes of the Clone Wars animated TV show, not all of which aired before Disney purchased Lucasfilm and Star Wars. While George Lucas is the sole writer on a few of the listed movies and TV show episodes, the vast majority of the movies and episodes included additional writers. And George Lucas was not one of the writers for the Clone Wars movie. The canon does not include the expanded universe, which is more commonly referred to as the EU, and was later relegated to being Legends by Kathleen Kennedy in early 2013 after Disney purchased Lucasfilm and Star Wars in late 2012. So now that we have 4 defined canons for 4 different franchises, they can be compared with each other to assess their individual strengths. And the first thing that we'll look at is a chart that illustrates the individual total word counts for each of the 4 canon sources, which I will preface by saying that in the case of the 3 Fantastic Beasts movie scripts, those have been estimated since actual total word count values were not available. Estimates are also being used for the Star Wars The Clone Wars animated movie and the 133 episodes of the Star Wars The Clone Wars animated series. Everything else is based on actual reported total word counts. So of these 4 franchises, the Harry Potter universe has the largest canon due to it being composed of a total word count that's more than 1.2 million words long. That's followed by Frank Herbert's 6 Dune novels that contain a total word count of more than 848,000 words. Interestingly, the total word count for the pre-Disney owned Star Wars canon is nearly as large at 794,000 words, which is slightly higher than the 789,000 words contained in Tolkien's Middle-earth canon. But we have to bear something in mind about the Star Wars canon. Its total word count comes from a combination of movie and episodic TV show scripts, not novels, so its official canon is partially visual, which makes the canon far more open to interpretation and more abstract. In the case of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter universe, only a very small percentage of its total canon comes from visual sources, the 3 Fantastic Beasts movies, while the vast majority of it is purely written. But the canons for both J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth and Frank Herbert's Dune are based entirely upon the written word. And I want to point out that while there are some illustrations contained in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books and a map of Middle-earth was included with J.R.R. Tolkien's written works, those illustrations are distinct and have to be viewed independently from the written word. That's very different from the movies and episodic TV show episodes, whose moving visuals are an intrinsic part of experiencing those authoritative works. Now, what if we were to divide the Star Wars canon in terms of eras, the original trilogy era and the prequel trilogy era? What would that look like in terms of total word counts? This next chart is very revealing. The Star Wars original trilogy era, which is only composed of 3 movies, is less than 84,000 total words. That's incredibly revealing about the amount of world building, character development, and plot lines that exist in the original trilogy as compared with the Star Wars prequel trilogy era and its nearly 711,000 words. In fact, if we view these 2 Star Wars eras in terms of total word lengths in this pie chart, we can clearly see that the original trilogy era only accounts for 10.5% of the entire Star Wars canon, while 89.5% accounts for the prequel trilogy era. The reason for this massive difference has to do with the Clone Wars animated series, as illustrated in this next pie chart, which shows the percentages of each of the contributing works to the entire pre-Disney owned Star Wars canon. The Star Wars The Clone Wars animated series alone accounts for 76.4% of the entire Star Wars canon. And as this next chart illustrates, the Star Wars prequel trilogy era, by total word count alone, is 8.5 times stronger in terms of canon length than the original trilogy. The canon for J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth is 9.4 times stronger than the Star Wars original trilogy. And the canons for Frank Herbert's Dune books are 10.2 times stronger, and J.K. Rowling's entire Harry Potter universe is nearly 14.6 times stronger. Thus, the very limited content for the 3 Star Wars original trilogy movies is the weakest link in the pre-Disney-owned Star Wars canon in terms of overall franchise vulnerability to being potentially damaged by redefining its fictional universe, characters, or plot lines. And that's exactly what happened, ladies and gentlemen, when Kathleen Kennedy and her cohorts, Jar Jar Abrams and Rian Johnson, got a hold of the Star Wars franchise. They retconned the death of Emperor Palpatine, they transformed Luke Skywalker from a fearless hero into a cowardly, emasculated, self-loathing curmudgeon, and they transformed Han Solo from being a reformed criminal and rebel general into a bumbling, incompetent, backslid criminal and a deadbeat dad who abandoned his wife and son. Why? Because Kathleen Kennedy wanted to guarantee her ultimate Mary Sue strong woman self-insert character Rey Palpatine was the only possible person to defeat Emperor Palpatine decades out of sequence, to undo the male patriarchal heroes of George Lucas's original trilogy, and to send her personal message to the general public that not only is the Force female, the only heroes that you're ever going to have under her reign of terror of Lucasfilm are going to be female. Since we have some additional metrics that we can use to examine the strength of these 4 franchises, let's take a look at the total number of writers involved in each one. And be prepared to hold onto your hats, folks, when you see just how many writers contributed to the pre-Disney-owned Star Wars franchise. Yes, there were 35 writers involved in the pre-Disney-owned Star Wars franchise's canon, while there are only 3 for J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, 2 for the Harry Potter universe, and 1 for Frank Herbert's 6 Dune books, which are the core canon for the Dune franchise. 35 is indeed a rather humongous number as compared with the other franchises, but let's take a look at the actual percentages of how much these canons are attributable to their original creators. For Dune, it's 100%. For the Harry Potter universe, it's 98.8%. For Tolkien's Middle-earth, it's around 96.5%. And for Star Wars, it was only around 47.6% before George Lucas sold Lucasfilm and the Star Wars franchise to Disney. And that only adds to the fact that the Star Wars franchise had a weak canon that could be easily damaged if left in the wrong hands, which, unfortunately, is exactly what happened, because today's Star Wars franchise includes the incoherent, inconsistent retconning nonsense created by Kathleen Kennedy's cohorts, as well as her feminist ideological messaging. George Lucas trusted Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy when he decided to sell Lucasfilm and his Star Wars franchise to Disney. George had no idea until it was too late that both of them had misled him and lied to him directly to his face. And unfortunately, the Star Wars franchise is dead thanks to Kathleen Kennedy, her cohorts Jar Jar Abrams and Rian Johnson, as well as everyone else who has worked on the less than stellar Star Wars shows on Disney+. As I had talked about in a very recent video, The Acolyte is supposed to premiere this summer, and it's very likely going to become the worst Star Wars show ever made. Anyone who has been a longtime Star Wars fan has undoubtedly had to face the truth about the franchise's current state. Some may remain content to ignore the facts that the franchise is dead, but many, including myself, have begrudgingly accepted it and allowed ourselves to emotionally divorce ourselves from something that we have probably loved for most of our lives. So my only advice to those who still regard themselves as being Star Wars fans is this: don't be afraid to accept the truth that the Star Wars franchise is dead. It's okay to let it go and to move on with your life. Unlike Star Wars, there are many other franchises out there that are safe because they have written canons that can't be damaged, regardless of what the uncaring and ideologically obsessed Hollywood elite do to these franchises in movies and shows. Star Wars lacked a solid, well-developed canon for its original trilogy era, which was safe while George Lucas owned it. But once he sold it to Disney, its vulnerabilities directly contributed to its downfall and death. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.